This is Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde.
We're here for a very special Agent Provocateur. This episode was not planned. We're going to talk about the devastating news we received a few days ago on the passing of Ken Dryden. Adam, how are you? And how are you doing?
I'm good. I when I saw the news, because it came down, if my memory serves, late Friday night, the first person I thought about was Allan, was you, Allan, because I knew, and you've talked about multiple times on this show what an influence Ken Dryden was on your younger years, and I think going through your Twitter account, and we're going to talk through some of the things that some of your connections with Ken, but also some great stories from his career. I described it on the Steve Angle podcast, Allan, as he's like hockey's polymath. He's our Leonardo da Vinci, right? Just somebody who, whatever he did, he wasn't just okay at. He didn't just pick it up as a hobby. Oh, he liked politics, so he became a minister and then a senator. He liked hockey, and he became one of the greatest goalies of all time. He jumped back into hockey and became, led the late '90s Leafs back to the playoffs and to the Eastern Conference Final. Wrote books. The Game is widely considered one of the greatest hockey books of all time, and
one of the greatest sports books. Not just hockey, it's been compared in the same conversation with Ball 4, Jim Bolton. But the Game transcends the sport of hockey.
Yeah. And then beyond that, it was so interesting because when we wanted to bring Ken on, the only thing he was interested in, and he is a former guest on this show, the only thing he was interested in was advocacy and awareness for concussions and CTE, and getting headshots out of the game, knowing full well that you could never fully get them out. But how do you reduce them? How do you, hey, we didn't know that this was a problem before. We know now. So what are we going to do about it? He was completely disinterested in talking about anything that he had accomplished, which is all anybody wants to talk about when they talk about Ken Dryden, Allan. So I think the first place I want to start this is, can you remember watching Ken Dryden and registering, that's my favorite player and I want to be a goalie? Because a lot of people don't know this. You played goaltending at McGill. Like, you were a very, very good goaltender.
I was a goaltender. I wouldn't go so far as to say very good.
University's good, man. It's far better than I got. House league.
I was very good in my own mind. But too many people didn't agree with that observation.
Yeah.
I was about 6 years old. It was 1971. And Ken Dryden is called up from the Montreal Voyageurs, who were the Montreal Canadiens AHL farm team that year, playing afternoon games in the Montreal Forum. Many times there were double headers before the Canadiens game. And he played 6 games near the end of the regular season. Al McNeil is the head coach of the Canadiens. Ken allowed 9 goals in 6 games, and shockingly was declared by Al McNeil the starting goalie for the first round of the playoffs against the heavily favored Boston Bruins, the defending Stanley Cup champs, who had scored more goals in the regular season than any team in NHL history, led by Phil Esposito, Johnny McKenzie, Bobby Orr, and everyone picked the Bruins to win the series. The Canadiens lost the first game. They were down 5-1 in the second game. Montreal came back and actually won that game 7-5, and ultimately won the series in 7 games. It was during that series, as a 6-year-old, that I became enthralled. Some people would use the word obsessed with Ken Dryden. He had an aura about him back in the late 60s, early 70s, goalies were generally on the smaller side, like me. And you had Rogie Vachon, Canadiens goalie, that Dryden came in and supplanted, about 5'8", 5'9". You had Jacques Plante in the 60s at 6 feet tall, was considered a giant in the net. And here comes this 23-year-old law student from McGill Law School, 6'4", coming out into the crease, the mask, the look, the charisma. There was an aura about him that just captured me. And really, Ken Dryden was my childhood idol. And we can talk a little bit about that later. And ultimately, my life intersected in so many ways where it's very rare that a person gets to become friends with their childhood idol.
Yeah.
And ultimately, later on in life, I got to become friends with Ken and was fortunate to have his friendship and share so many interests that we had, specifically around concussion awareness, devoted to ending CTE, making the game safer. And we'll talk about that as we get deeper into this.
Well, what's mind-bending about Ken, and I think it's important for people on the younger end to understand what a force Ken was, because, even for me, Ken retired 10 years before I was born. And so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put it that way. But, this is a guy who I knew Ken Dryden as the president of the Toronto Maple Leafs because he was, when that team reemerged out of a slump in the mid-90s where they missed the playoffs a couple years in a row, with Curtis Joseph and the emergence of Matt Sundin and some of these other younger guys who were coming up. When Doug Gilmour was traded, who was my hero, that was sort of like a wow. And then, they go get Curtis Joseph and the Leafs are good again. Ken Dryden headed that up. I'm looking at his hockey DB right now, Allan. He played 8 years. He only didn't win the cup, and this is a really bad double negative, but only didn't win the cup twice. He won the cup that first year. He didn't get it the second year, won it the third year, didn't get it the fourth, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row to end the 70s.
And there were so many remarkable things about that run. He was always the reluctant goalie. He got, I don't think people appreciate what a long shot it was in his own mind that he was ever going to make it to the NHL. He had an older brother who played in the NHL as a goalie. So here's the 71, the miracle run, and it culminates in Game 7 in the old Chicago Stadium. Cup in the building. The Canadiens ultimately won the game 3-2. Jacques Lemaire scored on a slap shot from the red line. Henri Richard scored 2 goals. There was a huge controversy during the Stanley Cup Finals where Henri Richard made a comment about Al McNeil, his head coach, saying that he's the worst coach that I've ever played for.
Oh my
God. It caused a huge sensation off the ice. Ken Dryden skates off the ice with the Stanley Cup and the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP a full year before being named NHL Rookie of the Year and winning the Calder the following year. Just remarkable stuff. But the whole story of how Ken came to Montreal is pretty amazing.
Yes.
So there was not a traditional draft like there is now, but there was some semblance of a amateur draft. And back in the 60s, the Boston Bruins had drafted Ken Dryden, which ultimately became one of the worst moves in Boston Bruins history, because little did they know that Ken Dryden was going to haunt them throughout the 1970s. Dryden's rights were ultimately traded to Montreal. He graduates from Cornell University. All of the top prospects back then played in Major Junior. Dryden should have gone to Major Junior and played in what was called at the time the OHA, the Ontario Hockey Association, which morphed into the OHL. Instead, he goes to Cornell University and plays NCAA hockey, right? There was Red Berenson, Tony Esposito, and then Dryden coming from NCAA. And I mean, that's basically it, right? A couple more, but not many who made it to the NHL. After 4 years at Cornell with this insane one-loss record, I think he lost 6 games in his entire NCAA career over 4 years, something like 76-4, 76-5. He then Canadians want to sign him, right? He says no. He says no. I want to go to law school. So a lot of people don't know about this, but there was a permanent Canadian national team of strictly amateur players, and pros were not allowed to play in the Olympics. Pros were not allowed in world championships. So Canadian Hockey Canada had a permanent national team, and they were based in Winnipeg. So Ken Dryden enrolled in University of Manitoba Law School, and he's playing for the Canadian national team and said no to the Canadians. The national team disbanded in 1970.
Okay.
So now Dryden has no hockey team to play for, right? Canadians come calling again. And they said, we want you to sign. And he's like, I want to go to law school. I'm not giving up law school to play hockey. So they made a deal that no NHL team has ever made previously with any player, let alone a prospect. They said, you can transfer to McGill University Law School and you can be a full-time law student, and we'll assign you to the Montreal Voyageurs, and you only have to play home games. So he never went on the road.
Unbelievable. That's amazing.
Okay, so after he got comfortable playing with the Voyageurs and settled into his classes at McGill Law, he said, I can go on a road trip, periodically, but not further than Quebec City.
Yeah.
So Dryden would play games in Quebec City, right? But no further than Quebec City. And ultimately, as I said, with the last couple of weeks of the 70-71 NHL season, Dryden gets called up to play his first NHL game. He played it in Pittsburgh. The Canadians won 5-1. Dryden made some great saves. And here we go. The incredible Miracle Cup 71. The entire city of Montreal. This was not the time when the Canadians were expected to win the cup every year.
No.
They were in 4th place in the Eastern Division and the last team qualifying for the playoffs in the East Division. There were only 2 divisions, East and West. And Montreal beats Boston in 7, Minnesota North Stars in 6, the Chicago Blackhawks in 7. Ken Dryden played every minute of every playoff game and Conn Smythe Trophy. The next year, Rookie of the Year, he's established is 71-72. He's established himself as arguably the best goalie in the NHL, and he wins the Calder. Montreal loses in the quarterfinals to the New York Rangers in 6 games. Pretty devastating loss for him. although he had a great season. He's named to Team Canada. And this is where we get the 72 Summit Series with Dryden and Esposito as the two goalies, trading off games. 8-game series, the dramatic win in Moscow. Ken ultimately wrote 2 books on that series. One fairly recent over the last couple of years. One he wrote that was released in 1973 with a ghostwriter by the name of Mark Mulvoy, and it was called Face Off at the Summit. Now, at the time, 25-year-old NHL players did not write books.
No, they still don't, Allan.
Right? And it was a great book, which I bought the week it was released as a 10-year-old and devoured it. But let me tell you what happened then. In 1973, the Canadiens win the Cup. So that's 2 cups in 3 years for Ken Dryden. And he wins the Vezina. And he's named first team All-Star. And over the course of the season, he came to find out that half of the goalies in the NHL were making more money than he was. Half the goalies. And remember, back then, no salary disclosure.
Right.
Media.
So would this just
fans,
be like in talking to guys, he would find this out?
Yeah. He started talking to guys and calling them up and speaking to people who knew. And he pieced together what all the goalies in the league were making and saw and found that he was somewhere in the middle. And he went to see Sam Pollock, the general manager of the Canadiens. He had 1 more year left on his contract. And he said, Sam, there's 7, 8 goalies making more money than me. And I don't think that's fair. I would like to renegotiate my contract right now and take into account my status as a Stanley Cup winning goalie, the Vezina Trophy winner, first team All-Star, and 2 cups in 3 years. And Sam Pollock said, I have a strict policy to never renegotiate a contract once it's been signed. You have 1 year left on your contract. Go play the year and I'll talk to you at the end of the season. And after much thought and consideration, Ken Dryden, being a man of principle, said, I'm not playing. I'm not going to play. Right? So it became the first real holdout in one of the first and it's based on a contract dispute. And many people have, without knowing any better, have said, oh, he went to finish law school. No, he graduated from law school in May of 1973, right? He had graduated from law school. He didn't leave hockey for a year to go to law school or finish law school. It wasn't I'm choosing my studies over hockey. No, it's been referred to as a sabbatical. I mean, he was in the throes of a contract dispute. And when he made the decision to not play, he tried to call Sam Pollock. And for whatever reason, Sam wasn't available or wouldn't take the call. He ended up talking to Jacques Courtois, who was the president of the Montreal Canadiens at the time, who always sat in the front row behind the Canadiens bench, Jacques Courtois. And Dryden told Jacques that he was retiring and not going to play further with the Canadiens. And Jacques went off on Dryden, called him every name in the book, told him that he's going to be blackballed from hockey, issued threats, ultimatums. And Dryden said, I really wasn't sure 100% inside if I was making the right decision until I spoke to Jacques.
Wow.
And Jacques solidified it. So then what Ken did is he moved back to Toronto, his hometown, and because in Ontario and Quebec, you need to article for a year with a law firm before being eligible to write the bar exam, decided to article. And he articled with a law firm by the name of Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt. And he articled there for a year, making $135 a week. And near the end of his articling, he was granted a $500 annual bonus divided up. So it wasn't a significant amount of money. He had to adjust his lifestyle to making $135 a week. He also played hockey as a defenseman in an industrial hockey league called Vulcan Packaging. Okay, so he's playing hockey for them. It's beer league. It's beer league hockey, right? Yep. And a funny fact that came out of that no one knows, okay? The owner of the Canadiens, 1973, are Brothman brothers, okay? During and it's not related to anything in particular, certainly not related to him, but during the 1973-74 season, when Ken is playing for Vulcan Packaging while he's articling in Toronto, the Brothmans bought Vulcan. So he's like,
I can't get away from these guys.
I'm playing for the Brothmans own the company that I'm playing for. Yeah. Who own the Canadiens?
So so it's interesting. You mentioned a couple of things there. First off, I do think his brother, who passed away in 2022, warrants a quick note, because Dave Dryden is credited as the first goalie to come up with the masks that we see today, or at least the fiberglass and the cage. He's the first goalie to do that. Also played 2 years with Wayne Gretzky with the WHA Oilers and the NHL Oilers in their first years in the game. So,
he also played for the Buffalo Sabres.
Yes.
And what happened, that has never happened, after the Dryden brothers, is they actually played against each other in an NHL game. It happened a few times, but the first time is a great story. The coach of the Buffalo Sabres was Punch Imlach. And the coach of the Montreal Canadiens was Al McNeil. Okay. Punch Imlach had a sense of grandiose hubris. He was a larger than life personality. The first whistle, stoppage of play in the game, Punch Imlach switches goalies, pulls Dave Dryden, and puts Roger Crozier in the net. During the second period, Rogie Vachon, who was a starting goalie for Montreal, after Al McNeil saw that Dave Dryden was starting, he still put in Rogie Vachon. Rogie gets hurt. Rogie leaves the game. Ken Dryden comes into the net. The moment Dryden comes into the net, Punch Imlach pulls Roger Crozier and puts Dave Dryden in. Now the brothers are playing against each other. At the end of the game, Ken Dryden, he didn't really know what to do, but he starts skating towards center ice. Dave Dryden starts skating towards center ice. They meet together at center ice and they shake hands.
Wow.
And the two brothers played against each other in the net about 4 or 5 times thereafter over the course of their careers. And every time the game ended, no matter the score, both brothers skated to center ice and shook hands with each other. And that became sort of known that you're going to do that at the end of the game.
That's cool.
Murray Dryden wrote a book in the early 70s called Playing the Shots at Both Ends, the story of Ken and Dave Dryden. And on the cover of the book was a picture of them standing at center ice, shaking hands with each other.
That's really cool. One of those, you think about it now. I mean, that would be all over Sports Center everywhere the next day. Just a massive, the arena must have been apoplectic, like loud. Now, when we talk about Ken Dryden, we talk about the time that he was playing, Allan. First off, I think I need to know, did the Montreal Canadiens eventually capitulate and just give him what he wanted? Or did he get tired of working working at the law firm?
So here's what happened. John Bassett was the owner of the Toronto Toros in the WHA.
Yep.
And it was assumed that when Ken's contract with Montreal expired, because he couldn't play with a valid contract still with the Canadiens, even though he had retired. Mm-hmm. And Ken was hired by the Toros to supplement his income doing Toronto Toros games as an analyst on Global Network. Okay. So Ken was doing color commentary and he sees the sparse crowds with the Toros. He sensed there wasn't a lot of financial stability in the WHA. And while he may have had thoughts in his head of signing with the Toros after the year articling, he became disillusioned with the WHA. The Canadiens came to town to play against the Leafs. Dryden came down to Maple Leaf Gardens and saw, a lot of the players. He saw Pierre Bouchard, who he was very close with, Larry Robinson, and the guys missed him. The Canadiens weren't the same without him. And there's soap flying around the dressing room and Dryden's in there, after the game, after they're showering. And Dryden's like, inside he wanted to come back. But he had said to somebody, I don't think Sam Pollock would even talk to me. Right? That's how bad it was. Would Sam even talk to me? And there were some intermediaries who helped bring the two of them together. Mm-hmm. So the Canadiens lose in the first round of the playoffs with a rookie Bunny Larocque, Michel Place, and Wayne Thomas. Larocque had emerged as the number one goalie and was a rookie. Ken is working at Osler Hoskins and Harcourt, and after they lost to the Rangers, I wrote Ken a 11-page letter. I was 9 years old. And I let him know in the letter how much he meant to me. What a horrible season it was for Montreal. The joy, it looked like the team was playing with no joy. There was the mystique around this team had worn off. They weren't the same on the ice. They weren't the same off the ice. I told him how much the fans and people like me, the 9-year-old boys in Montreal, how much we missed him. And I begged him to come back and sign with the Canadiens again. And I sent the letter to the law firm where he was articling. And about a week later, by the way,
Allan, I have to interrupt you. You have to understand, for a 9-year-old to know and to look up the address and to write 11 pages. I mean, that says something about you too, right? The passion that you had and the drive that you had. I don't know a lot of 9-year-olds that would do that. I'll just be honest.
I was obsessed. I was absolutely obsessed. And I got a letter back from Ken to my house. And I opened it up, opened the envelope up. The envelope was typed with my address, my name and address. I opened it up, and there's a handwritten note from Ken. And it said, Dear Allan, thank you for your letter and for your comments. I'm looking forward to playing with the Canadiens again. Ken Dryden. And I read the letter, mm-hmm. and I started to cry. Now, I had a scoop.
You did. You knew before the newspapers did.
Right. And there's no social media. I told my dad.
Yeah.
And my family saw the letter, and a couple of days later, Ken Dryden is announced signing a new multi-year contract with the Canadiens, and he's back with the team.
Now, tell me this, Allan.
Now let me just jump a little bit back for a second. So there's a picture I also posted online, which is the first time I ever met Ken. I was 7 years old, and it was during the 1972 season. I had appendicitis and needed surgery. And during the surgery, my appendix burst. I ended up being in the hospital for about 5 weeks. My fever wouldn't come down below 103. The doctors couldn't figure out why. Some of the poison in a burst appendix got into my intestines, and they had to do some procedure to remove a piece of my intestine. I was a very sick 7-year-old boy. And when I woke up from the surgery, my dad is standing over me, holding my hand. And he said, "Allan, tell me the one thing you want more than anything in the world, and I'm going to get it for you." And I said, "Dad, the only thing I want is to meet Ken Dryden. That's it." Somehow, my dad was able to make contact with Ken Dryden and share with him the story. And Ken said, "You tell your son that when he's out of the hospital, I would like to invite him and you as my guest to a Montreal Canadiens practice, and I'd like to meet your son." So I am now super motivated to get out of the hospital, get back home, get well. And my dad contacts Ken. They arranged a date. I go down to the Montreal Forum with my dad. I'm standing on the corner of Atwater and de Maisonneuve at the security desk when the players all arrive. Dryden arrives, and I run to him, and I throw my arms around his thigh, and I'm got tears in my eyes. I'm squeezing Ken Dryden's thigh as a little 7-year-old boy, and he looks down at me and he says, "Mr. Walsh, I presume?" And I looked up at him. "Yes." And he brought me into the forum with my dad. We sat and watched practice. And after practice, he brought me into the Canadiens dressing room, brought me around to every single player one by one. I had a white autograph book that I'm actually clutching in the photo, white knuckled, and introduced me to every player on the Canadiens who signed my autograph book. And then he brought me into Scotty Bowman's office. I sat down on the chair with Ken, and we had a conversation with Scotty Bowman where I proceeded to tell him, how he can make his lineup better. And Scotty was very amused at the lines I was pitching to him.
Wow.
And who should play and who shouldn't play. And I recall the conversation vividly. And then afterwards, my dad took a picture of us together, and Ken's so tall that the top part of his head is cut off. You only see that down.
Oh my
God. And of course, me down there, all the way down there.
Well, they used to call him the 4-story goalie. And I think there was, what was it? I've got to look, I got to find the quote because there's a very funny quote from Phil Esposito about him. He called him that thieving giraffe.
Yeah, it's giraffe.
He was, like you said, one of the first tall goalies. Now, Allan, I want to know, because obviously, you were able to bring Ken on this show, and he wanted to talk about concussion advocacy, and that was the only way he would come on, right? He didn't want to talk about his career. That was something that was very near and dear. How did the two of you get connected in your adult years? What was the first meeting, and did he remember you when you were a little kid?
Well, he wasn't just president of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He was also general manager.
Yes.
And representing some players in Toronto back then, we found, I'm on the phone with him. I had a few meetings where he was a part of the meeting. The NHL draft, we were together. I had a couple of players drafted by the Leafs and went with them to the Leaf suite after the draft with my client and parents. And the first time I saw Ken, I was reminding him of what happened when I was 7 years old and the kindness that he bestowed on me. And as I'm recounting the story, Ken Dryden had a look of absolute horror on his face. He was thinking the story was going to end with, and he never did anything about it.
Oh,
and when I said, and we came down to the Montreal Forum and you invited us down, he actually physically was like, like
I love that. I love that. I love that.
I had terrified him.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, and so I guess, in your dealings, kind of like, we've had Bill Guerin and Steve Yzerman and Doug Armstrong and Ron Hextall on this show, all general managers in the NHL and all former players too. And guys that, you kind of meet by virtue of just working together. What was your sense of Ken Dryden as an adult, like when you were an adult? Because obviously as a child, you've got, and we're going to show some of the clips of this, you've got your Ken Dryden scrapbook from when you were a kid, and you tweeted out the picture of the note that he wrote back to you, which I thought was amazing that you still have that. When you met Ken, because so many people say you should not meet your heroes. You met Ken as an adult. What did that feel like? Must have been a little bit crazy for you.
There's really nobody that I interact with, speak to, meet with, that I'm in awe of. And every conversation with Ken, every email that we would exchange, every meeting that we had, I had to suppress the fan inside of me because I still always was a little bit in awe of him. You mentioned the scrapbook. I started a scrapbook in 1972. It was known as the Ken Dryden Scrapbook. And we're going to show some of the pages from the scrapbook here on the podcast right now. I started cutting out photos and stories from the Montreal Gazette, the Montreal Star, the Sunday Express newspaper in Montreal, some French newspapers, the Journal Montréal, Dimanche Matin, the Sunday paper in French, and I start magazines, and would every week collect everything and stick it in the scrapbook, and then one day a week I would sit there and meticulously cut out the article and the photos and scotch tape them into the scrapbook. When the first book got full around 1977, I started a second scrapbook that went all the way until he retired with the Cup in 1979. Those two scrapbooks were probably two of the most cherished possessions I have in the whole world. And it was always kept in the closet of my home with my dad during the 2010 playoffs. Mm-hmm. Yaroslav Halak is on the Canadiens. He's having this historic run. They called it in Montreal Halak Spring, where the Canadiens, were underdogs again and defeated the Penguins in 7 games, defeated Washington in 7 games. They're in the conference finals against the Philadelphia Flyers. And, Yaroslav Halak is the toast of Montreal. And everyone was comparing Halak and what he was doing in the net. The last Game 7 against Washington, he stopped 53 shots for the win, to Ken Dryden's 1971 run the legendary run.
Mm-hmm.
And my son in 2010 was 8 years old. My dad was not in great health at the time. He would pass away a few months later. We flew together, my son and I, to Montreal. I didn't tell my dad I was bringing him, and snuck him into the house. And my son jumped out from the kitchen, yelled surprise, and my dad just couldn't believe his grandson was there in Montreal, and it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. During that trip, and of course, I was taking Ethan, my son, to games, Canadian games. Ethan went into the closet and came out holding the scrapbook, which was almost as big as him. And he said, "Dad, what's this?" And I told him this is book one of my Ken Dryden scrapbook. And we sat together and we went through the scrapbook page by page by page, 3 hours. And he's like, "Who's that? What's this? What happened here?" And I'm reliving the entire scrapbook with him. 3 hours with him sitting on my lap. That night, we went to a Canadiens game in the conference final. And after the game, I'm with Yarrow's wife and my son. We go into the elevator, and we're taking the elevator down to the dressing room level of the Bell Center. And the elevator doors open, and Ken Dryden is standing there. And I looked up, and my eyes got big. I was like, "Hey, Ken." "Oh, hello, Allan. How are you?" "Good." "Ken, this is my son, Ethan. Ethan, this is Ken Dryden." And Ken Dryden bent down and shook my 8-year-old son's hand.
Man.
And Ken got into the elevator. We got out, and we got about 5 or 6 steps away from the elevator. And my son's next to me, and he says, "Dad, Dad." And I looked down, and he said, "Wow, I just met your childhood hero."
Pretty cool. And
Yeah.
at the same age, you met your childhood hero, which I think is pretty full circle. Life can be amazing that way. Allan, I think we judge so many of these people based on the stats that they have, right? And what's so unique about this show and what's so unique about you is that you're able to give us a view of some of the hockey people that we grew up with from a personal level. Ken played just shy of 400 games. He lost 54 of them. So he roughly would win every 6 games to every 1 loss, which is amazing. I guess, 74 ties in there too, but who's counting? This man from Ontario being a big deal in Quebec. I wanted to know, and I know you're Anglo-Quebec, as my dad is too. I wanted to know what that was, because the Montreal Canadiens, Quebec at the time specifically, was very nationalist. It was the rise of kind of the beginnings of the separatist movement. What was that like?
In the game, Ken Dryden recounted in vivid detail the night in 1976 when the Parti Québécois government beat the Liberals in a provincial election, and there was a electronic board in the Montreal Forum that went across, and it was giving election update results during the game,
which would have been crazy technology for the time,
right? And it was showing the results as they were coming in, and the crowd was growing in enthusiasm every time there was an update. And then there was a message flashed across the screen: "We have a new government." And the place erupted. And the players felt the tension in the building. Not that they were pro one way or another. Mm-hmm. It was just the tension of the moment, and having a separatist government winning the provincial election and coming into power.
Right. Well, it's a it's an amazing thing for a guy from Hamilton, right? Just to be the hero in Quebec's. I mean, at the time, even, and I think people don't know this either. Montreal, for 400 years until the last 50, really, and maybe even the last 40, was the heart and soul economically of Canada. Sure. And it's still an enormous city, but we obviously know Toronto is sort of the biggest city by population, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Montreal was the center of Canadian economics, Canadian business. All the head offices were there. It's such an important city and such an important point in time. You think about the things that he went through, the 1972 Summit Series. You mentioned, the Parti Québécois taking power for the first time. When you talk to him in his time after the game, and he was a minister in Paul Martin's government, and he was, involved in many, many things. What do you think? He was
Ontario Youth Commissioner.
Yes. Yeah.
Very soon after he retired, he was a member of Parliament, as you said, a cabinet minister. He ran for prime minister.
Yep, I remember that.
He did a lot of things. He was a man of big ideas, and Friday night when he passed, people that he knew received an email from his wife, Linda. And I received it as well, letting his circle know that Ken passed after a battle with cancer. She talked a little bit about his big ideas and his passion on the ice and off the ice, and asked for no flowers, said that there would be a private memorial service. And then in lieu of any flowers, to please consider making a donation to either Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto, to their cancer wing, or to the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which was an organization that I'm a member of the board of CLF, dedicated to raising awareness, research, and finding a cure for CTE, ending CTE, and making all games, all sports, but particularly hockey as well, safer for players. And specifically asking people to donate. We'll put a link up for the Concussion Legacy Foundation if anybody would like to make a donation in Ken's name. It's a wonderful organization. I'm proud and honored to be part of it. And that email really hit home. It caught me Friday night, total shock. And I have to say, I was devastated, reconnected with some people who knew him well. And we all just talked about how nobody knew he was sick. And I understand him wanting to keep it within his family, certainly his choice. But I had said everything to him that I wanted to say, fortunately, about a year ago, where I had a chance to communicate with him and let him know what an inspiration he was to me, the miraculous impact he had on my life. And I can honestly say I wouldn't be where I am today if not for him. And even though he was not part of my life back then, he served as a goal. He served as something to attain to. And when people would ask me when I was 7, 8, 9 years old what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would answer an NHL goalie and a lawyer, just like Ken Dryden. And I never made it to the NHL as a player. But my life in the NHL have intersected in representing players for the last 30 years. And I am a lawyer, and I personally owe Ken Dryden everything.
Allan, as we wrap this episode up, I want to ask you, you look at the accomplishments of this man, and I look at Ken, and I'm like, okay, so incredible goaltender, goes into law, writes books, comes back into hockey, president of the Leafs, general manager of the Leafs for a bit, then goes into politics, which, listen, you can make your name in other arenas, but if you go into politics, it's a great way to get a bunch of people to hate you very quickly, right? Like that politics is a very risky thing. Then he devotes himself to, as you've mentioned, concussion reduction and CTE research. And obviously was really only interested in talking about that stuff towards the end. What do you think drove him? Like, I look at his life and his career and I go, it's amazing. And also I ask myself, why? What was his inspiration? Why do all this? He didn't have to do all this. He could have just been a lawyer. He could have just run the Maple Leafs. He could have just been a member of parliament and stayed in politics. He could have done so many things at a narrower scope of view. What drove Ken Dryden to be the man that he was?
I always got the sense that he had so many different interests. I mean, he retired. We haven't even talked about this, but he retired, 31, turning 32 years of age.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unheard of. I mean, he could have played another 5, 6, 7 years easily in the NHL. He just won his 4th consecutive Stanley Cup. Who retires after winning the Cup, winning the Vezina, and co-winning the Vezina, and being named first team All-Star?
Yep.
Who retires at that stage of their career? And the record being 5 in a row, you figured the team was going to stay together to go for one more. But Scotty Bowman left to Buffalo, Jacques Lemaire left to Switzerland, Ken Dryden retired, and the Canadiens lost in their bid for a 5th in a row. You get the sense that Ken had so many different interests. He really was a really modern, very modern person, and had so many different interests. He was collecting observations and thoughts and writing them on scraps of paper his entire last season in the NHL, and stuffing them in his glove compartment and in his night table at home. And he had hundreds and hundreds of scraps of paper with little notes written on them to remind him when somebody said something that he wanted to trigger a memory so he wouldn't forget it. And ended up taking his family and going to England, where he spent an entire year going through his scraps of paper and writing arguably the greatest sports book of all time, right? And the book is still, I still once a year pick up the game and read it, and still learn new things from it. What a remarkable book for anyone to write, let alone a Hall of Fame goalie. And then with all the other things that he did, he truly followed his passions. And the one thing about Ken, and it's a great topic to end on, if somebody would ask him what his legacy is to the game, I really believe it would be focused on his passion to reduce concussions and reduce the incidence of CTE. He had a fire in him about it. When Bob Murdoch, his former teammate and good friend, passed away and was found to have CTE, and really the last several years of his life lived life with a injured brain, and wasn't himself. I think that had a tremendous impact on Ken. He loved watching his grandchildren play hockey. And I think watching all these kids playing hockey, the next generation of players, I think that had a tremendous impact on him. He wrote Game Change, primarily focused on the life and death of Steve Monador, and said publicly at the time he wrote the book for an audience of one person, Gary Bettman. And he met with Gary, gave him the book, implored Gary to consider what is going on with all of the retired players in the retired player community with regard to CTE. He cared. He cared about these players, and he wanted to make a difference in their lives, but equally important to him, he wanted to make a difference in the lives of all future players, the kids playing the game now and the kids playing the game in the future. He cared.
It's an amazing thing. Ken Dryden, what an impact on the game. Top 100 player all time, and one of the greatest Montreal Canadiens of all time, and probably one of the greatest Canadians of all time. So, Allan, thank you for this, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode.
Thanks, everybody.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.